Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I'm not sure how many of you know this, but once upon a time I did used to be an IT applications guy. And I think we all know that applications are important to businesses. But I still get flashbacks of pointless meetings where we spent hours discussing if we should categorise those critical apps as critical apps, tier 1 apps, core apps, and the list goes on. So I'm curious, what name did you give to your critical applications in your business? Indulge me. Send me a quick email to techblogwriter@outlook.com. I'm always curious if businesses everywhere have these same conversations. But the truth is, of course, that the labels are completely irrelevant. It's the protecting of those mission-critical applications that run your business. That is what is important. Because they are the lifeblood of every organisation. They must perform as expected, be protected against internal and external cyber threats, and be compliant with strict regulations. And that's why more than 300 of the world's leading brands are protecting their cloud, hybrid and on-prems and critical systems with a company called Onapsis. So I wanted to explore this topic further and bust a few myths along the way. So buckle up, hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way to Boston so we can speak with JP, CTO of cybersecurity firm Onapsis. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. On this side of the line, JP, my name is longer but harder to pronounce in English. I'm CTO and one of the founders of Onapsis, a cybersecurity company based out of Boston, which focuses on a very particular field of cybersecurity, which is business critical applications, or also known as ERP applications, which encompass ERP, CRM, BI, BW, supply chain, HR applications, procurement, all sorts of different applications that basically support the business processes of organizations.
Excellent. And we will have a lot of people listening from a wide variety of backgrounds. And for everyone listening who might think that cybersecurity and that entire market and landscape there is an incredibly crowded marketplace, can you share the kind of problems that you solve with Onapsis and what makes you different from all those other solutions out there?
Yeah, definitely. We can tie back this to a little bit of history, because that definitely explains and gives context in terms of not only why we exist, but also the type of problems that we solve. So it was back there in 2008, 2007, with the other founders of the company. We are still in our DNA, IT security professionals, right? We are very technical. We were doing penetration tests, vulnerability research, we were hired by organizations to assess their overall security posture. But surprisingly, every time we were assessing an organization's security posture and we bumped into an SAP application, by that time, we didn't know we didn't even know what it was. So we bumped into applications that all of them looked the same, and all of them had the same set of security issues, even independently of the company. All the companies were having a very similar set of very, very critical issues. We started analyzing, hey, what's going on here? What's the problem? And we realized not only the root cause of this, but also that it's a problem that doesn't only affect SAP applications. It's a problem that affects customers that are running ERP applications because of the complexity. And the problem is that basically organizations were investing a lot of resources, therefore money, in securing these business critical applications, these ERP applications, but they weren't doing this holistically. So security for business applications meant roles, profiles, SLD, segregation of duties, authorizations, making sure that each one of your thousands of employees were able to do only what they were supposed to do and nothing more than that, right? If you can create a vendor, you shouldn't be able to release a purchase order. And there are different set of business processes, independently of the technology that you use, that are incompatible. So you shouldn't, as an individual, you shouldn't be able to do two of those, because then fraud could happen. And that was back then the whole focus. But the technology, the underlying frameworks that were supporting those applications and that are supporting those applications today has a lot of complexity and a lot of integrations and customizations that introduce significant levels of risk if the company isn't focusing the right effort there, right? So if for companies are not really paying attention to cybersecurity at the ERP application layer and just focusing on roles, profiles, authorizations, SOD, then they could be sitting on a ton of risk. Even if the vendors release improved new patches and new security capabilities around these ERP applications, still most of it relies on the customer to adopt, implement, and improve. So over time, we realized, hey, this is a big problem affecting some of the biggest organizations in the world, and affecting some of their most sensitive data. So we need to do something about it. We created Onapsis, and we started delivering solutions for this. Not only, we started with SAP because that's our roots, right? We realized, hey, this is a problem in these SAP customers. Eventually we realized, hey, it's not just SAP customers, these are ERP customers that are not properly addressing the underlying technology and the overall security risks affecting their platform. Fast forward into today, we are working with some of the biggest organizations in the world, helping them secure their crown jewels, right? Their applications supporting finance, procurement, HR. Some of our customers have their most critical IP in these applications, right? The formulas of what they build, information about their customers, their vendors, how they operate. So that becomes very important and very critical for them.
And you did mention your roots there, and I'm always fascinated in finding out a little bit more about the story behind a company. So can I take you back in time? Can you tell me a little bit about the story behind the company and also where your name come from?
Yeah, definitely. So the three founders are from a country called Argentina. It's in the southern hemisphere, in Latin America. Interestingly enough, it's a very good, let's say, region for cybersecurity. We have seen a lot of traction and a lot of companies really doing things around cybersecurity in Argentina. Probably a combination of the education and the background of the country. So it's a good, let's say, country to really develop cybersecurity resources. And we happened to be there, and we started from there, realized, hey, it's a problem, let's solve it, and started building on top of that. So the company name is Onapsis. It's kind of a mix between synapses, like the brain cells, the brain connections. So we are solving a complex problem, because we have to put different things together and really bring this into something that is actionable to customers. That's why we thought the synapses connections, it requires a lot of connections between people and brains to really make it happen. But also the Ona is the local connection, right? Ona is a tribe from Argentina, actually from this most southern part of the world, which is Tierra del Fuego. That's a very cold area where this tribe was very tough and really hunters, and while looking for different words and really trying to tie this to our roots, that seemed like a very good way to tie it back to the local component with a tribe that was very tough, hunters, in really very difficult environments, like lands down there, and yeah, it made sense. We combined those two words.
I just love that. I love how you call yourselves the tribe, but in tribute to your Argentinian roots. It's incredible. It proper puts the heart and soul into the business as well. But here in 2020, of course, how are you changing the game of cybersecurity? Can you expand on that for me?
Of course, 2020 definitely relevant in terms of not only the context that we are living today with COVID and all the different challenges, but also how organizations rely on business applications to operate. I was hosting a presentation a few days ago, virtual, of course, in this context, and talking about how it matters to people and organizations, right? Like business application security. And there are a couple of components. Think about the different industries that are more and more critical today than ever. But even extrapolating that to any other industry as well. Think about the pharma industry, the food industry, the energy industry, even the healthcare industry, like all of these different components of our society that operate entirely based on business applications. So a disruption on those applications, like an exploitation, a breach, a worm, something disrupting those applications would have a significant impact in the overall supply chain and in each one of us today and always, right? So I like to tie that back to really how it matters to us. And it's important today, 2020 as well, because organizations are all going through digital transformations and migrations to the cloud, trying to get these applications even more accessible to each one of their employees, to be able to continue operating in the cloud, on premises, exposing these applications to the internet. And while they do that, these applications become more and more exposed and more accessible. Their underlying risks are also increasing as well. Right? The likelihood of exploitation, the likelihood of compromise is becoming more and more increased as well. So that's how we work with organizations to basically give them visibility, control, governance around those risks, and be able to fix some of those underlying risks, monitor them, and put a plan in place to get into a healthier state all in all.
And for any business leaders listening, what would you say they need to know as they begin to migrate business critical applications to the cloud? Because I think there's so many questions and it's easy to get bombarded with information, but what do you think are the essential things that they need to know?
Yeah, there are a couple of very specific components of migrating business applications to the cloud. When you migrate an application, a traditional, ordinary application, there are different levels of complexity. Do you do Kubernetes? Do you do cloud native? Do you migrate your applications to a new, let's say, server with a new virtual machine? Do you do a technology refresh? There are all sort of different components of migrating traditional applications. In the case of business applications, the challenges are different because business applications are applications that are acquired by the organization and extended to map their business processes, especially in the large enterprise sector. Right? You will not see two business applications in the world that are the same, just because each organization has to customize on top of what they acquire from the vendor. So what we see organizations doing is they transition to the cloud in different capacities, starting by migrating their traditional applications that were traditionally running on-premise to more of an infrastructure as a service model, cloud service model, meaning I moved my on-premise to AWS, GCP, Azure, HANA Enterprise Cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, you name it, right? Your provider of choice becomes the first step. But then as they mature that transition, they start adopting alternative processes as SaaS service, cloud software as a service. So in those business processes where the company doesn't need to really customize heavily and they can adopt the standard more and more, Examples of that are HR, procurement, travel and expenses. So those are fairly standardized processes that organizations don't need to really implement a lot of changes. In those cases, they can adopt more of SASE applications like, for example, Ariba, Concur, SuccessFactors, and other applications that are serving these very similar business processes, but in a subscription-based approach, fully operated in the cloud and provided by the vendor. And eventually, they also adopt platform as a service in a way to extend and interconnect all those moving parts: infrastructure as a service, on-premise, software as a service, all of them tied through a PaaS solution. So each one of these steps will have its own challenges in terms of security, right? In the infrastructure as a service world, now you have very similar technology stacks than you have on-premise, with the same complexity levels, the same levels of potential risks, with the additives of being in the cloud, right? And with the potential risks introduced by the cloud as well. And also in the software as a service model, you no longer have to deal with patches, for example. Patches exploiting vulnerabilities is not something as a customer that is of your concern. It's probably still a concern to you, but that's entirely addressed and governed by the vendor of the software application. So the challenges are different. However, regardless of the cloud service model, regardless of whether you're running on-premise or in any of these varieties, you still have a lot of different levels of risks just because it's a business application. And I'm talking about users, authorizations, segregation of duties, interfaces, configurations related to how the users connect to security features, extensions and customizations are still very much a concern regardless of the cloud service model. So there are different levels of risks that are still valid in the cloud and when you're migrating to the cloud. So the recommendation to the listeners is start getting exposed to what are the different risks and threats. The Cloud Security Alliance is a good resource for that. I'm the co-chair of the Cloud Security Alliance ERP working group, Cloud ERP working group, and we deliver assets there continuously to be able to provide visibility into the customers that are migrating to the cloud, what they need to do. So one of them being the top 20 critical controls, which regardless of the cloud service model, regardless of the technology, we provide guidance in terms of what are the top 20 controls or top 20 risks that you need to start addressing even before you start the migration process, right? So you make sure you have a plan there.
And I also read that you said that on-prem security tools often fall short. And who is responsible? And you also asked the question, who is responsible for protecting the applications both before, during, and even after migration? But can you expand on that point that you made there?
Yeah, definitely. So in the case of business applications, especially when it comes to migrating to the cloud, there's often confusion and a lot of back and forth in organizations in terms of where are the boundaries of the responsibility, especially when it comes to security. And it's often a blur line that gets defined when you sign the contracts, when you define the SLAs in the negotiation phase. Right? It's not even talking about technical details or even before implementing a single line of code or a single piece of the infrastructure. When you are negotiating the contracts, that's a critical part when you need to deal with defining and making sure that the boundaries are properly set. And when that happens, and completely independently on where you drew the boundaries and what's in, what's out on your responsibility as a customer, the data is always responsibility of the customer, right? So even if I'm running a software as a service solution, even if I'm consuming 100% SaaS and really not having a single server on my premises or on my cloud provider, it's still your data is your responsibility. That's a very important part to understand, because you need, as a customer, you need to make sure that you do due care and due diligence of the controls that you implement around that data and those processes, even running in the cloud. That's why even in the cloud aspect, when you migrate to the cloud, a lot of organizations think that, okay, security is solved by the provider and it's already, I migrate, I check the box, and I forget about security. It's actually the opposite. You need to take care of security even more, because some organizations, when they have business applications on premise, they believe, hey, I'm behind the firewall, I'm okay. Now you are no longer behind the firewall, no longer have the visibility that you had before. So what we found with a lot of our customers is that the migration to the cloud milestone becomes an important milestone to actually adopt security and compliance controls through this process, right? So before, during, and after, data and processes supported by this technology, regardless of which cloud service model you adopt, it's still your responsibility. So you need to be comfortable with those levels of security. It's in the end, it's a risk acceptance exercise. So whatever you don't control and you don't govern, you accept, and you need to also make sure that you have a good level of visibility into what you accept and what you manage in terms of risks. And we help a lot of organizations to go through that process and really get visibility and control on the risks that they just don't want to accept, because they think it's too much risk on their business application.
And a lot of businesses have literally hundreds of applications, and many are guilty of having a more reactive than proactive approach, and often oblivious to the fact that there's so many vulnerabilities that can be exploited if those apps remain unprotected. But is that something you can talk about as well?
Yeah, and exploitation of vulnerabilities in business applications has become more and more common and really more and more critical. A couple of examples have been highlighted already by the US CERT, part of the Department of Homeland Security, 2016, highlighting the exploitation of a critical vulnerability over the internet called the Invoker Sublet for SAP applications, 2018, highlighting the activity of threat actors around business applications, and 2019, last year, also because of the release of a very critical exploit called 10K Blaze to affecting SAP applications too. So these are probably the most relevant examples of active exploitation and risk against business applications. 2019, it was the third alert of the entire year, one of three alerts in the entire year, right? So thinking about relevancy and importance of these type of applications, that definitely paints the picture in terms of what's important for organizations around risk. So, and these are just a couple of examples, right? But thinking about the vendors, Oracle releasing the CPU 4 times a year, SAP releasing the Patch Tuesday 12 times, so monthly. Every month and every 3 months for Oracle, every month for SAP and every 3 months for Oracle, you have new patches, meaning new vulnerabilities that are analyzed by the bad actors and weaponized immediately. So after, for example, I was reading an article yesterday talking about how already threat actors are weaponizing a WebLogic vulnerability that affects every business application on top of WebLogic, for example, EBS, PeopleSoft, and other solutions that are developed in Java and supported by WebLogic. And like this is an example on Oracle. I gave you some examples on SAP, but all in all, there are supercritical vulnerabilities that are being exploited by threat actors, and organizations need to be properly monitoring for that and having a program in place for securing these applications. Because otherwise, they wouldn't even be able to tell if someone is actively exploiting their business applications and extracting or modifying data, which is ultimately the most critical part, right? Not so much about the exploitation of the vulnerability in itself, but really what the threat actors can ultimately do with that exploitation, which is modify any financial data, perform fraud, access PII information, access IP, you name it. It's really anything could happen there.
And I think all of us, including myself, have news feeds and timelines, are bombarded with information, and there's a lot of disinformation and inaccurate information out there as well. So one of the things I always try and do on this Daily Tech podcast is try and finally bust a few myths and lay their misconceptions to rest. So are there any myths or misconceptions that you'd like to lay to rest today?
Yeah, I like this question. I think I touched base a little bit before, but one of the misconceptions that we often hear, and it's 2020, and I still hear this, and as an IT security professional, I can't believe that I'm hearing that, but it's really about the different languages that we speak, right? We are always talking to internal auditors, for example, but also application administrators, right? For example, the basis teams, the Oracle DBAs, and it's in our nature, right? Even though we are technical people, at least with the system administrators, we talk about risks and vulnerabilities, and sometimes it's really not perceived properly as the risk that it is from a vulnerability and exploitation perspective. For example, talking about 10K Blaze, we go and talk to organizations, and quite often, I would say more often than not, we find this vulnerability even in production systems, right? And when we talk to their basis teams, they say, yeah, but that's behind the firewall, so we are protected, right? And actually not, right? So it's a vulnerability that can be exploited by anyone without any type of username or password that can connect to the application through the network, meaning that anyone after a phishing attack, after a compromised account, after a compromised endpoint, going through internet-facing applications, going through a whole variety of different ways that threat actors are using to get into a network and then compromise that application very easily. And even thinking about the internal risks, right, like employees and partners and vendors that are already in the network, probably counting by thousands or even hundreds of thousands of different potentially people that can connect to that system. So the we are behind the firewall myth is something that unfortunately I keep hearing. And the good thing of the cloud is that the cloud is helping debunk that myth, because now you don't have it. That application is no longer on your premises. It's now in the cloud. It's in someone else's data center, where you can still put some controls there, but you no longer have the visibility and the control that had before. And that's pushing some organizations to realize about this and start acting more proactively, let's say.
And looking towards the future, what's next for Onapsis, and what is your primary focus this year? Because I suspect it may have changed from the very beginning of the year, but what is your big hope to end this year on a high?
Yeah, we are actively working on extending our platform to other solutions. So we already support multiple ERP technologies like SAP ABAP, SAP Java, SAP HANA, Business Objects, and also Oracle E-Business Suite. We are further expanding to other technologies as well, as our customers are asking for to us for supporting really other technologies, either on-premise or in the cloud, even in the cloud SaaS applications stack. So for us, it's all about really expanding the coverage so we can provide more visibility into other applications away from SAP and Oracle. Let's say complementing SAP and Oracle technologies, existing technologies. So it's a lot about that, and we continuously do a lot of research around vulnerabilities and risks. So we monitor the threat landscape and what's happening in terms of business applications. So our research team is continuously innovating in terms of the threat vectors and the attacks, different attacks that could affect business applications, and we basically translate that knowledge into our platform. So that's another area of innovation that we continuously do as well.
And for anyone listening that would like to find out more information about Onapsis, the kind of work that you're doing and how you might be able to help them too, what's the best way of reaching out to you?
Many different ways. I'm very active on Twitter, LinkedIn, webpage www.onapsis.com. There are many different ways. I think the webpage provides a lot of visibility into how we can help. But yeah, any ways, happy to help anyone. My email, jppereze@onapsis.com as well. So open to starting any discussion.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast today. So much value in this 30 minutes we've spent together, because we've covered such a huge amount of ground, really, hearing more about how vulnerabilities can be exploited if those business applications remain unprotected, and having that open discussion about who is responsible for protecting applications before, during and after migration, but of course also busting a few myths along the way as well. So thank you so much, JP, for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a great opportunity, and looking forward to doing more.
So a big thank you to JP there for taking the time to come on here and discuss what enterprise practitioners need to know as they migrate business critical applications to the cloud, including how traditional on-prem security tools often fall short. And we seldom ask the question, who is responsible for protecting the applications before, during and after migration? This is a topic very close to my heart. You can take the man out of apps, but you can't take apps out of the man. And I'd love to hear your stories. If you look after applications, feel free to share those war stories with me by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website, of course, is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find 1,200 interviews, learn how you can work with me, and even find all my social channels too. But as lockdowns begin to ease throughout the world, I'm going to go out there, feel the wind in my hair and the sun on my face, before returning back to my tiny little office tomorrow with another guest. So a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.